ChatGPT said the Senate hearing room was crowded, the air buzzing with reporters, aides, and sharp-eyed camera operators. The agenda for the day was the Green New Deal, one of the most hotly debated issues in Washington. Everyone expected the usual speeches, arguments, and political performances. No one expected what actually happened. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat near the front, flipping through notes, her expression firm. She wore a steel blue blazer, her hair neatly tied back. Her eyes weren't just reading, they were watching, waiting. She had a strategy. Senator John Kennedy sat across from her, relaxed as ever, leaning back slightly in his chair. He wore his signature smirk, his Southern charm always on display. When he spoke earlier, it was with the usual folksy, tone-light jokes, down-to-earth metaphors. He'd called the Green New Deal a fantasy cooked up in a college dorm room. The room had laughed, but AOC hadn't. She slowly stood and moved toward the podium. Her heels clicked sharply across the marble floor. The cameras shifted. Every network in the country was streaming live. Millions were watching. "Dear colleagues," she began, her voice sharp, confident. "We are discussing the future of this planet. We're talking about devastating storms, vanishing coastlines, and entire communities being erased. And yet," she paused, looking directly at Kennedy. He didn't flinch. "It's hard to take this conversation seriously," she continued, "when some in this room insist on treating it like a country fair." A few senators chuckled nervously. "Senator Kennedy," she said clearly, her words slow and deliberate, "you are a joke, and not the kind that makes people laugh." There was a gasp in the room. File disappeared from Kennedy's face, but he didn't speak. Reporters in the back scrambled to type. Live feeds blinked red as networks cut to close-ups. AOC turned away, her smirk now obvious. She had delivered her blow. The audience stirred, some shifting uncomfortably. Kennedy's silence stretched long. Then, slowly, he uncrossed his arms and tapped the microphone. "Madam Chair," he said, his Southern drawl even and low, "I'd like a moment to respond." Permission granted, he stood. He didn't look angry. He didn't even raise his voice. Okay. But his tone changed just slightly. It was colder, more precise, you know, he began. "I've been called a lot of things in my life. But a joke? That's a new one." A few chuckles. "Nervous ones? Come from a place where people speak plain," he continued. "Where stories are used to teach, not just entertain. And today, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I think it's time I tell." 1. He leaned on the podium. "Back in 2007, I was part of a delegation to the Gulf. It was supposed to be a quiet energy summit. Nothing major, but what happened there? Something I've kept to myself for a long time." The room tensed. Cameras zoomed in. AOC's expression shifted just slightly. "There was a document," he said. "Not public, not classified either. More like buried. It detailed how a multinational pact was on the verge of being signed, one that could have shifted global oil prices and, ironically, set the stage for real green alternatives. But someone made sure it never saw daylight." A low murmur spread. Through the room, Kennedy didn't stop. "I watched that deal die. I watched men shake hands in secret rooms and walk out laughing, knowing the price Americans would pay in the decades to come. I filed away the details, figured someday it might matter." He looked directly at AOC now. "You want seriousness? Let's be serious. You're not the only one who cares about the future. Some of us just don't shout about it." The room was silent. Even the clicking of cameras had stopped. "Still got that file?" Kennedy said. "And if we're going to play this game out in the open, then maybe it's time we all see it." Then he sat down, no smirk, just silence. AOC didn't speak. Her expression had changed. Not fear, not regret, but something close to doubt, like a crack in glass. The chair called for a recess. Reporters stormed out. Headlines were already being written. Twitter was melting down. Nobody had expected this. Everyone thought it would just be another shouting match. Instead, it had turned into something else, something dangerous. As Kennedy stood and began walking toward the exit, a young man in a dark suit brushed past the guards and whispered something in his ear. "They know you talked," the man said. "You've started something." Kennedy nodded once, never breaking stride. Outside, rain began to fall on Capitol Hill, and somewhere, in a forgotten archive beneath Washington, a locked cabinet waited. Inside it, a single dusty folder carried the secrets of a deal that never happened, and the names of those who made sure it didn't. The storm had only just begun. The Capitol's corridors echoed with hurried footsteps and hushed voices. Staffers whispered to each other in corners, reporters huddled around phones, and security officers doubled their presence. The Senate was technically in recess, but something far more dangerous had been set in motion. John Kennedy moved through the chaos like a man already familiar with storms. His stride was calm, but his eyes flicked over every camera, every hallway, every shadow. The young man who had whispered in his ear, James Heller, former CIA analyst, and now intelligence liaison, followed at a controlled distance. In a private chamber deep inside the Capitol, Kennedy sat alone at a long mahogany table. In front of him was a black leather folder with a gold clasp. He opened it slowly. Inside were 12 pages copies of emails, energy policy drafts, private, memos from 2007, and a photograph of 5 men shaking hands under a Gulf Coast chandelier. One of them was now a sitting cabinet member. Another was a retired oil executive turned media donor. A third was a young diplomatic aide now working with AOC's Climate Council. He stared at the photo, then closed the folder. On the other side of the Capitol, AOC sat in her office, her team flanking her. Her jaw was tight, her foot tapping rapidly. A news anchor's voice crackled from the muted TV on the wall. "Senator John Kennedy has hinted at the existence of a suppressed international energy agreement from 2007. Drawing skepticism, but also curiosity. We need to go on offense," said her communications chief. "He's dragging you into a fossil fuel conspiracy." "I'm not worried about him," she said, her voice low. "I'm worried about what's in that file." The others looked at her, confused. She didn't explain. She turned to her. "Press aide. Get me an exclusive with Newsline Live tonight. Prime slot." Meanwhile, Kennedy's documents had made their way to a secure briefing room in the Eisenhower Executive Office building. 3 people were waiting for him: James Heller, a White House legal advisor, and a Pentagon liaison. The mood was cold. "You realize?" the legal advisor said, "what you've done today qualifies as a soft leak of diplomatic materials. If you go any further, you're going to make enemies in places that don't send emails. They send people." "I didn't leak anything," Kennedy replied. "I told the truth, which is still legal for now." He slid the folder across the table. "This isn't about climate or oil. It's about a game that was rigged before we even knew we were playing." James Heller opened the folder. His face changed as he flipped each page. "These emails?" he whispered. "Where'd you get these?" "I had a friend in the Energy Subcommittee. He gave them to me on a flash drive after the summit. Said it would all come out one day. He died in a car crash 6 months later. The file was in his desk." The Pentagon liaison stood and walked to the window, tense. "This isn't just a domestic issue anymore," she said. "What you're saying is true. China knew. So did the Saudis. This could explain their sudden withdrawal from last year's carbon accords." Kennedy nodded. "Exactly." Back on Capitol Hill, AOC walked into a private side room and locked the door. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through a hidden contact list, and called an encrypted line. The voice on the other end was cold, British accented. "Is this about the senator's comments?" "How long have you known he had that file?" she asked. A pause. "We assumed it was destroyed. If he kept a copy, that complicates things. You told me there were no surviving records, and we were wrong, which means you're exposed. You need to handle this fast before your movement collapses under the weight of old sins." AOC's hand tightened on the phone. I didn't sign any of those deals. I was in college. But the man who funded your first campaign did. She hung up without another word. That night, Newsline Live aired a special segment. AOC was their guest. The anchor leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Congresswoman, earlier today, Senator Kennedy implied there was corruption surrounding international climate policy. A response. AOC was calm, poised. Senator Kennedy is grasping at shadows. This is a distraction from real solutions. Climate change isn't a story buried in a file. It's here. We're already behind. The interview ended, but her expression stayed clouded. 20 minutes later, on a quiet digital forum used by former intelligence officers, a new thread was posted under the alias GulfWatcher07. It contained a single sentence. If he releases page 9, everything changes. Halfway across the country, in a dimly lit apartment, journalist Mara Benton stared at her screen. Her phone buzzed an anonymous message. Watch Kennedy's next statement closely. Then find the woman named Rachel Cross. She didn't know it yet, but the center of this political storm was not Kennedy. It was Rachel. And her past was about to ignite the next chapter. The next morning, Mara Benton sat at her desk in a Chicago apartment strewn with coffee cups and notes. Her eyes were fixed on a paused video frame of Senator John Kennedy's Senate hearing Bombshell. In his hand, almost unnoticed by most, was a page half visible, marked page 9. Her phone buzzed again. Anonymous text. She's in D.C. now. The name you need is Rachel Cross. She doesn't exist in any government file. But she was there in 2007. Mara looked up the name. Nothing. No LinkedIn, no public photos, no records. Just one obscure mention in a redacted energy conference transcript from 2007 in Washington. Kennedy arrived at his office flanked by aides. His face was grim. He hadn't slept much. AOC had gone on TV and painted him as delusional. But now it wasn't just about political jabs. It was about something buried for nearly 2 decades. James Heller was waiting inside with a folder. We found her, Heller said. Rachel Cross. Real name, Rachel Alina Cherkosky. Born in Prague. Dual citizenship. Served as a private consultant for the Gulf Accord energy talks in 2007. Why no record of her since, Kennedy asked? Heller's face darkened. Because someone buried her. Not just her job, her name. She disappeared after the summit. Rumor is she testified in a private intelligence review, then dropped off the grid. Kennedy sat down slowly. Can we find her? She's already found you, Heller replied, sliding a handwritten note across the table. Page 9 was never supposed to exist. If you read it aloud, be ready for what comes next. Meanwhile, AOC was behind closed doors with her chief strategist, Miranda Shaw. Her office was surrounded by reporters, cameras waiting for her to react to Kennedy's growing momentum. AOC's posture was tense. The encrypted call from the night before still echoed in her ears. The man who funded your first campaign did. Miranda, she said quietly, find out exactly who arranged the energy lobby donation in 2018. The one that came through Blue Vest PAC. I want every layer of it. Miranda looked uneasy. That was buried for a reason, Congresswoman. That's exactly why I need to know. At that same moment, deep in the Library of Congress archives, Mara Benton met a contact named Eli, old government librarian, who once leaked drone footage to the Washington Standard. Mara showed him a printed image of Rachel Cross. Eli didn't blink. Rachel Cross was the ghost who ended the deal, he said. Back in 2007, the Gulf Accord was ready to roll. Saudi Arabia, China, even Norway were all aligned. Then Rachel walks in with a single USB drive. Shows a private recording of a backroom delay American official offering a delay in return for campaign funding. That clip was so explosive it nearly caused a collapse in talks. Who was the official? Mara asked. Eli didn't answer immediately. You wouldn't believe me, he muttered. But here's the twist. That USB drive. It was handed to Rachel by a Republican staffer, someone young, idealistic. His name was ... James Heller. Back in the Capitol, Kennedy was preparing to re-enter the Senate floor. His staff urged him to wait, but he had already made a decision. The folder in his hand now had a post-it attached. Use page 9, but only if she doesn't speak first. That afternoon, C-SPAN's live feed flickered to life again. AOC took the microphone first. She didn't go for the attack this time. She didn't even mention Kennedy by name. Spent years trying to. Lead on the issue of climate change, she began. But leadership means knowing when to question your own legacy, and when to confront secrets that may be tied to you even if you weren't aware. Reporters glanced at each other. I've asked the FEC to reopen investigation into foreign-linked campaign contributions from 2018. I've also instructed my team to cooperate with any intelligence audit regarding international energy dealings connected to my office. The room was stunned. She looked over at Kennedy. Truth isn't partisan. It's dangerous. But we walked toward it anyway. Kennedy stood slowly, holding the folder. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on the press gallery. It's going to read a page today, he said softly. But maybe I don't need to. He looked down at the yellow note. Rachel had warned him, let her speak first. That night, a black SUV parked quietly in an alley behind Union Station. A woman stepped out wearing a scarf and sunglasses. She entered a quiet hotel lobby through the side. Rachel cross-checked in under a false name. In her coat was a USB drive on a THEA copy of the original 2007 backroom video, long thought destroyed. She was back. And this time, she wasn't hiding. Mara Benton watched from across the lobby, her voice trembling as she whispered into her phone. She's real. Rachel Cross is real. And if that file leaks, it won't just end political careers. Pause. It might collapse alliances. The rain that night fell like static across the marble rooftops of Washington. The storm outside barely compared to the one brewing in the Capitol's core. In a secure room inside the Mayflower Hotel, Rachel Cross sat across from Mara Benton, the journalist who had chased a ghost and caught her. Mara placed a small recorder on the table between them. I need to know everything, she said. Not just the video, not just the deal. I need the why. Rachel didn't flinch. Her voice when she spoke was commeasured, like someone who'd lived too long in the shadows. Gulf Summit, 2007. I was hired by an international green development panel as a consultant. Not American, not partisan. My job was simple translate legalese between the European bloc and the Gulf states. But what I walked into wasn't about diplomacy. It was a trade. Energy delay in exchange for political money. Mara leaned forward. Who brokered it? Rachel hesitated. You'll see it on the video. A man from the Department of Energy. But he wasn't acting alone. The push came from above. There was a list of beneficiaries, half Democrats, half Republicans. Anyone still in office? Rachel nodded. At least 3. One of them sits on the current climate committee. Another is a major media owner. And the third, he's the same man who first introduced AOC to the donors behind Blue Vest PAC. Mara's breath caught. That connects. It connects everyone, Rachel said. But she was just a rising star then. I don't believe she knew. Yet, now, she's surrounded by the same ghosts I tried to expose. Back on Capitol Hill, Senator Kennedy met privately with James Heller and 2 Senate intelligence aides. They reviewed the chain of custody for the folder, cross-checked the memo dates, and examined the watermark on page 9. Rachel gave this to me before she vanished, Heller admitted. I was working as a Senate researcher then. I thought I could change things by leaking it. You were just a kid, Kennedy said, and you almost did. But now, things had changed. Rachel was no longer underground. And Kennedy knew. The game had moved into dangerous territory. Intelligence contacts were already buzzing. An XME-6 source had flagged unusual chatter from Riyadh, Beijing, and even Brussels. "They know she's back," one analyst said grimly, "and they're not happy." Meanwhile, AOC received a private alert. It was from a closed-loop system used only by senior DNC operatives. A flagged file had been reopened from an encrypted vault in the Energy Ethics Commission database. The file was titled Cross Archive. She stared at the screen. The access log showed a familiar name: Rachel Alina Cherkosky. "Get me Miranda," AOC said sharply. "We're not controlling the narrative anymore. It's about to unravel." That evening, Newsline Live ran a breaking report. Mara Benton's article had dropped. It didn't name names. It didn't publish the video. But it confirmed the leak. A previously buried international energy deal in 2007 has resurfaced after a former intelligence-linked consultant, known only as Rachel Cross, returned to Washington. Allegations suggest cross-party coordination in delaying green energy policies in exchange for overseas contributions. The Senate exploded. Cameras crowded Kennedy as he walked through the rotunda. "Senator, is this true? Who's implicated? Did you leak this information?" He said nothing. AOC held a short press conference outside her office. Her tone was sharp but controlled. "Let me be very clear. These allegations are true. I will demand a full bipartisan investigation. I do not care which party it leads. Do I care about the truth?" A reporter asked. "Are you personally connected to anyone involved?" AOC paused for a half-second too long. "Not knowingly," she replied, "but I welcome any inquiry into past campaign contributions made in my name." The real storm hit an hour later. A foreign affairs reporter from the Sentinel published a follow-up report with access logs from embassy surveillance in Brussels dated 2007. One log showed Rachel Cross entering the Saudi trade mission during a midnight negotiation. Another showed her leaving 12 hours later with a briefcase under her coat. The implication was obvious. She walked out with the file that would become page 9. Kennedy met Rachel late that night in an unmarked room beneath Union Station. The train schedule roared overhead as they spoke. "You've put a target on your back," Kennedy said. Rachel smiled faintly. "It was always there. I just stopped running." He opened the folder, placed it between them. "If I read this into the congressional record tomorrow, it triggers automatic investigation protocols. But it also opens the door to discredit you. I don't care if they call me unstable foreign criminal. Make sure the truth survives me." He stared at her. "If you're willing to be the sacrifice?" "I already was," she whispered. That night, inside a high-rise in Beijing, a call was made to an untraceable satellite phone. A voice answered in American English. Morning in Washington came wrapped in dread. News anchors were already calling it the day the Senate stared at itself in the mirror. Outside the Capitol, protesters had gathered, some holding signs demanding justice, others defending their parties, many unsure who to trust anymore. Inside, the Senate chamber was standing room only. C-SPAN's cameras began rolling at 9 a.m. sharp. The air buzzed with anticipation. Senator John Kennedy was scheduled to speak at 9:30 DHA at 9:18 AOC. Entered quietly. She wore a navy coat, her expression unreadable. Reporters shouted questions, but she kept walking. In her hand was a small folder marked briefing notes. But unlike Kennedy's, it was empty. Her real briefing had come the night before from a private meeting with someone in the DNC who told her, without emotion. That blue vest pack had been connected to the same Saudi-linked donors named in the Cross memo. She hadn't known, but she hadn't asked either. In a secure hallway under the chamber, Kennedy stood with his chief of staff, James Heller, and 2 intelligence officials. "You're about to drop a match into a powder keg," one warned. "You say the wrong name on the record, America's alliances could shift overnight." Kennedy looked up at them. "So what do you suggest?" Another 20 years of silence. No, we're suggesting you read carefully. At 9:31, the gavel hit wood. The hearing resumed. Kennedy walked to the center of the room, his usual drawl gone. His voice was low, almost intimate. Colleagues, Americans watching at home. Today I am not here to debate climate legislation. I am here to reveal something far more dangerous, a long-standing deception involving international energy policy. Campaign finance and deliberate misinformation by individuals in both parties. The room shifted uncomfortably. No one expected him to go that far, that fast. He held up the folder. This document, now declassified by an emergency ruling of the Ethics Committee, contains excerpts from what's known unofficially as Page Nina section of the 2007 Gulf Accord transcripts. That was removed from the final version released to the public. The cameras zoomed in. Page 9, he said. Details a back-channel deal in which green energy provisions were deliberately delayed in exchange for untraceable campaign contributions, rooted through shell foundations connected to foreign energy interests. He paused. These deals were brokered by political actors on both sides. Some of them are still sitting in this chamber. A murmur rose. AOC sat still, jaw locked. In her mind played the exact line she had read the night before from Rachel's handwritten note, when the names are spoken. Listen to who goes silent. Kennedy began reading. On August 22, 2007, a senior official with Energy Department clearance agreed to postpone regulatory measures on offshore renewables in exchange for bundled donations. Names include, he stopped. His eyes scanned the room. A consultant representing interests from Riyadh, a communications liaison now operating media outlets in D.C., and a congressional aide named Michael Vance, who later became campaign finance chair for several rising Democratic candidates, including Representative Ocasio-Cortez. The room turned to AOC. Her eyes were focused on Kennedy. She didn't blink. Kennedy continued. Now, let me be clear. Being adjacent to corruption is not the same as participating in it. But this is why we need a bipartisan tribunal. Because these secrets were protected by people across every aisle, every agency, every administration. At that moment, a man in a gray suit sitting in the audience stood up and walked out. No one noticed except Rachel Cross, who watched from a secure location via closed-circuit feed. That's him, she whispered to Mara Benton, the cleaner. His name's not in the files, but he's the one who buried the surveillance tapes. Mara turned toward the feed. Should we go public with that? Rachel shook her head. Not yet. Let them fall apart from within first. Back on the floor, Kennedy concluded, I'm submitting this document for public record. I asked the Justice Department to appoint a special counsel. And I urge this body to look beyond loyalty to party and instead show loyalty to the country. He left the microphone. The silence afterward was crushing. The next hour unfolded like a wildfire. Within minutes, trending hashtags included hashtag Page 9, hashtag Crossleak, and hashtag EnergyGate. News networks broke into regular programming. Global markets jittered. As oil trade analysts warned of diplomatic fallout, the Saudi embassy issued a statement denying all involvement, just as a leaked video clip showing an unnamed American official shaking hands in a private Riyadh boardroom began circulating online. That evening, AOC called for a closed door meeting with senior Democratic leadership. I want to go on live television, she said. Tonight, you'll get buried, one aide said. Your name's already in the donation chain? Then I better speak before someone else does. But before she could leave her office, a brown envelope was slipped under her door. Inside, a single Polaroid dot. It was Rachel Cross standing beside a whiteboard at the 2007 Gulf Summit. Behind her was a list of American names, with one scribbled at the top. It wasn't Kennedy, it wasn't AOC. It was Senator Alan Braverman, the quiet chair of the Ethics Committee and the one man who had remained utterly silent all morning. AOC stared at it, and for the first time, She understood the war wasn't between parties anymore. It was between those who knew on, those who refused to keep it buried. The storm outside Capitol Hill that night wasn't just in the sky, was in every newsroom, war room, and intelligence bunker across the Capitol. Every agency, every foreign attach, and every power broker was scrambling to figure out what would happen next. The bombshell testimony had shifted the balance. Senator John Kennedy had lit the fuse, and Rachel Cross's name was back in every encrypted network. But deep beneath the chaos, one name remained untouched, one figure who had sat silently through it all: Senator Alan Breverman, chair of the Senate Ethics Committee. For 15 years, he had built a reputation on restraint, centrist, low profile, always the adult in the room. And yet now, name sat at the top of Rachel's whiteboard. In a secure Georgetown townhouse, Rachel Cross studied the Polaroid. Again, she hadn't seen Braverman's name on any official memo, but unofficially, he had chaired the very subcommittee that rubber-stamped the Gulf Summit clearance. But she remembered something else. It wasn't just in the room. She told Mara Benton. He was the one who dismissed the translator before the final agreement was written. You mean he locked the room? Rachel nodded. He knew it would never survive the sunlight. Back at the Capitol, AOC held the photograph in her hands. She hadn't told anyone she'd received it, not even her aides. The photo was real. It meant the man now being whispered about as the voice of reason, the architect of the silence. She needed to confront him alone. At 10:34 p.m., the Senate building was nearly empty. Through a private corridor usually used for staffers, she made her way to Braverman's office. He was there, sitting at his desk, flipping through a bound folder labeled Ethics Inquiry, page 9. When she stepped inside, he didn't look surprised. "I expected you sooner," he said quietly. She placed the Polaroid on his desk. His eyes rested on it, unreadable. "So it's back," he murmured. "I don't care what party you belong to," AOC said. "But I will not let you bury this." Braverman looked up. "Do you think I'm trying to hide it? You think I don't know exactly what this will do to the Senate? To the country? You had a choice 15 years ago," she snapped. "And you chose silence." He stood up slowly. "Let me tell you something about that choice." And then, for the first time, the man spoke plainly. "I was contacted by an attach from the Saudi Energy Ministry 3 days before that summit. They didn't threaten, they offered stability in the Gulf, a guarantee of oil trade stability, and campaign donations through offshore proxies. In exchange, we delay federal clean energy mandates by 10 years. Just 10 years. AOC stared at him. "You sold the future." "I postponed a revolution the country wasn't ready for," he said. "The votes weren't there. The technology wasn't there. And your side-year generation was still in high school." "That doesn't make it right," she whispered. "No, but it made it possible to avoid collapse. We were on the verge of a recession. You think I'm proud of it?" She pointed. "At the photo, why didn't you stop it?" Braverman looked down. "It's because when I tried, they told me who'd already signed on. Republicans, Democrats, intelligence officials, corporate liaisons. You think it's just about energy, Congresswoman? This was about global alignment. About the World Bank, the IMF, oil reserves, military basing rights in the Gulf. You pull one thread, everything unravels." AOC's voice was cold. "Then let it unravel." He exhaled and sank back into his chair. "You don't understand what you're walking into," he said. "You think you can flip a system this big with a press conference and a hashtag? They'll devour you. I'd rather be devoured than owned." She turned and walked out. Meanwhile, in a lockdown hotel 2 miles away, Senator Kennedy met with a former NSA encryption analyst brought in by Rachel. "This is the master key," Rachel said, sliding a small hard drive across the table. "It contains every redacted section from the Gulf Accord archive, including video files." Kennedy looked at her, grim. "You sure this isn't going to backfire on you?" "It already has," she said. "They've been watching me since Brussels. One's following Mara. And I found a bug in my hotel room 2 nights ago. Jesus, they don't want page 9 leaked. But they'll settle for silence. Washington didn't sleep that night. The video had detonated like a precision strike. Page 9 was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It was raw, undeniable, and public. And at the center of it stood 3 people. John Kennedy, the man who triggered the firestorm. AOC, the one who smirked and then stood firm. And Rachel Cross, the ghost from the past who had finally spoken. But now the fire was turning inward. Cable networks replayed the leaked video on a loop. Social media fed on it like oxygen. Hashtag page 9 scandal. Hashtag braver men named, and most ominously, hashtag Kennedy signed. Across the aisle, leaders retreated to damage control mode. Official statements turned cryptic. Senate aides resigned quietly. And behind closed doors, emergency legal counsel had become the hottest commodity in D.C. Senator Alan Braverman was the first to fall. At 7:13 a.m., he resigned in a single-sentence letter sent to the Senate clerk. No explanation, no denial, just an end. Hours later, an indictment was unsealed: charges of conspiracy, obstruction of congressional ethics inquiries, and violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. But what shocked the nation more was who came next. Senator John Kennedy emerged from his home in Louisiana at sunrise, escorted by U.S. Marshals. His attorney had arranged a voluntary appearance. The footage played live. Kennedy, usually quick with a one-liner, walked in silence. Hands in his coat pockets, jaw tight. Rachel Cross watched the broadcast from an undisclosed location, a small motel just off Route 29 in Virginia. She looked calm, even as the weight of years bore down on her. Mara Benton sat beside her, laptop open. You're trending in 46 countries. They're calling you the American Snowden. Rachel didn't smile. Snowden ran. I stayed. Mara hesitated. You know what's coming next, right? Yes. She closed her eyes. They'll try to erase the rest of the truth. The names I didn't speak yet, but it's too late. People have seen what they needed to. In the Capitol, a special session of Congress was called. Cameras were barred, phones confiscated. For the first time in decades, members of both parties sat in silence as the acting attorney general laid out the facts. Foreign funds, falsified documents, and coordinated delays in green energy reforms that cost the nation a decade. And cost lives from flood zones in Houston to wildfire towns in California. And then the final act began. AOC requested to speak. The room froze. She stepped to the center, no prepared notes this time. Only memory. There was a time, she began, when I believed exposing the truth was enough. That if we simply spoke louder, clearer, more passionately, people would listen. But I've learned the truth is not enough. You need courage. You need pain. And you need to lose something before people believe you mean it. She looked around the chamber. Some nodded. Some looked away. I called Senator Kennedy a joke. I mocked him on national television. I thought that would win the debate. What he revealed, whether out of ego or conscience, was more important than anything I said that day. And then he fell, too. She paused. If that doesn't humble you, you're in the wrong profession. There was silence. I stand by what I fight for. But I will not stand by the lies that were built into our very foundation. I don't care what party it came from. What matters now is whether we rebuild honestly. She left the podium. Applause. Just heavy stillness. By evening, an independent tribunal was announced. Not under Congress. Not under the Justice Department. But a global commission of legal experts, energy analysts, and political scientists backed by both NATO and the UN to investigate the entire 2007 Gulf Summit and everything that followed. Rachel Cross was asked to testify. She agreed on one condition, that her testimony be public, unedited, and live-streamed in full. As she walked into the chamber weeks later, people across the world watched from homes, cafes, phones, and projectors on city walls. It felt like the ending of something long and ugly, and the fragile beginning of something new. She stood behind the microphone. "My name is Rachel Eliza Cross. I was there. I buried what I found. And now I'm here to uncover it all." What followed was a 2-hour account-coded memos, forged energy drafts, orchestrated media silence, and blackmail tactics reaching into newsrooms and boardrooms alike. She named names, she presented documents, didn't flinch. By the end of her statement, 4 world governments issued subpoenas. 2 senators resigned on live TV. A Saudi prince canceled a diplomatic trip. And a major U.S. news network admitted it had refused to run the Page 9 leak years ago due to editorial interference. And in America, something shifted. It wasn't clean, it wasn't perfect, but it was undeniable. The people had seen the machine break. And this time, they remembered the sound. AOC returned to the floor weeks later, not to shout, but to listen. Kennedy, awaiting trial, issued a handwritten statement. "I said once that she mocked me, but truth be told, I needed to be mocked. It reminded me what I'd buried. I don't ask for forgiveness. I only ask for light." And in a quiet studio. In D.C., a new documentary premiered. Its title, Page 9, The Day Silence Broke. And the final frame was Rachel Cross looking into the camera. Her last words: "We didn't fix everything, but we started telling the truth." And sometimes, that's the loudest sound in the world. End of story.